So thank you. So thank you again for being here. And before I start, I just want to let you know that the name of the program you are attending tonight is called Redlining in Seattle, Mapping Inequality. And before we get started, I just want to acknowledge here on behalf of the 34th Legislative District Democrats, I acknowledge the land on which we stand today as the traditional home of the Coast Salish and Duwamish people, the traditional home of all tribes and bands within the Suquamish, Tulalip, Snoqualmie, and Muckleshoot nations. Without them, we would not have access to this gathering or to this dialogue. I ask that we take this opportunity to thank the original caretakers of this land on which we live and work, who are still here. So again, everyone, we're in for a real treat. Our presenter is just has a wealth of expertise on this topic. And so we're very lucky to have her. I would like to introduce to you Ubah Gardher. She is the Equitable Development Initiative Division Director in the City of Seattle Office of Planning and Community Development. She currently oversees the EDI fund the city is investing in community-based organizations working in Seattle on anti-displacement strategies and economic development opportunities. Ubah's core values are rooted in social justice and transformative practice. She prioritizes working towards equity, authentically listening to community, and she has extensive experience in community development and building an inclusive vision with many of Seattle's communities of color. She was a member of the Housing Affordability Livability Agenda Committee. She previously was a program director at Puget Sound SAGE, and she was responsible for advancing SAGE's priorities related to equitable transit-oriented development. She focused on land use policy, affordable housing policy, transit-oriented development, community-based participatory planning, leadership development, and the importance of racial justice in policymaking. Ubah serves as a governance group member for Communities of Opportunity. This is a multi-million-dollar cross-sector initiative aimed at creating systems of change across King County to address equitable health, housing, and economic opportunity, and serves on Seattle Foundation's COVID Response and Recovery Fund Advisory Board. She serves on the board of Regional Coalition for Housing, that's ARCH, a partnership of the county and East King County cities who have joined together to assist with preserving and increasing the supply of housing for low and moderate income households in the region. Ubah is a proud single parent to 3 very energetic kids who keep her on her toes. It is my great pleasure. I also want to mention, she is also a candidate for King County Council District 9. And so with that, I would like you to join me for a very hearty 34th LD welcome to Ubah Gardher.
Thank you. Not a lot of people read the whole bio. And thanks for welcoming me to come and present on this. It's actually a lot more than just redlining, but all the land use policies that has impacted our region, plus the current impacts, because I have found that just talking about the history and not connecting it with the current impacts doesn't have the same impact when you do that. So I am gonna just talk about how we are fighting an uphill battle for systemic change and racial equity as it's related to land use planning. And then we will hopefully have discussion questions. So next, and I should have probably talked about this. So a shared common language of the history of racially exclusionary housing and land use policy in Washington State, particularly here in Seattle. a stronger sense of how layers of policies create oppressive systems, of how and disparate impacts for Black, Indigenous, and people of color residents here in our region. And then finally, hopefully, if there's anything that you get out of this, is get a sense of the stake we all have in dismantling these inequities, both personally and as an organization, and have that robust discussion that I talked about. Next. I like starting this presentation by talking about how systemic racism is baked into how our region was built and how it has grown. For example, looking at our historical context exposes how the rules that govern our relationship to land were constructed and how they are not given and they're not natural laws. What do I mean by this? Prior to colonialism, individual ownership was not the norm in anywhere, including Africa, the different islands, including Taro Island. Land was always recognized as belonging to the community and not belonging to anyone, but also something to live alongside and with. I wanted to add that private property laws were created by the Europeans and used to establish and maintain systems of racial and economic subordination of Black and Indigenous people. And I say that because concepts of property and race were created, again, in relationship to each other. Property laws directly shaped legal definitions of who was human and who was a citizen, and in the case of the enslaved African, who was a private property. And I want to finalize this by saying that while property laws were constructed to explicitly dispossess and exploit Black and Indigenous people and extract wealth and resources for European rulers, private property has become, even now, a cornerstone of our society. Next. You have started by recognizing that we are on the indigenous land. So next. And this is for Washington State. And then if you want to know where to find which land you are in, depending on where you are, you can just go to nativeland.ca. Next. And just wanted to say that we have gotten really good at this region by starting everything by acknowledging that we are in indigenous land, but I think we really need to get beyond that. And for me, that means that we have to start talking about reparations. Here locally, it's like, you can do that through the real rent to Amish to really put your mouth where your, is. Next. And when I say that, it means that there's a quick framework that I'm not going to go through, but it will be really good for you guys, for you to look through that as you are moving forward. But you have to acknowledge by facing the facts of what happened, by redressing and making amends for what happened, not in just the symbolic ways of like paying the fee like I talked about, but also making sure that only when those who have been harmed agree the wrongs have been remedied is when we can start talking about reparations framework. Next. So now I am gonna go back and talk to you about this history that I promised you. Next, there's a timeline, which quickly in the next hour, I'm gonna talk about from 1492 up to now that colonization is happening. We'll talk about 1870s to 1940s, how industrialization and urbanization impacted us. Between 40s and 60s, this tale of two cities where in every city we just have two different Americas and cities, depending on who's benefiting and who's burdened by the laws and rules that we put in place. I'm going to talk about white flight and urban sprawl that was happening between 1960s and 90s, and then just talk about everything right now, growth management and gentrification, and honestly, the impact of COVID and everything in between. All of that in an hour. Next. So we know that white settlers came to the Central Puget Sound region in 1851, and just 4 years later, the Point Elliott Treaty was established. Next. When Seattle was initially incorporated in 1865, an ordinance prohibited Native people from living in Seattle. And this is a quote from the ordinance, which says, "Be it ordained by the Board of Trustees of the town of Seattle that no Indian or Indians," and I'm like getting this quote from the ordinance. I know that there's a lot of Native Americans and indigenous folks out there that are triggered by using even the use of that word. So I just want to start by recognizing that. It said that no Indian or Indians shall be permitted to reside or locate their residences on any street, highway, land, or alley, or any vacant lot in the town of Seattle from a point known as the south side of Chas, Plummer's 10-acre lot, to a point known as the south side of Bell's Land Clam, unquote. Next. So between 1870s and 1940s, there was mass migration of African Americans and Europeans to the industrial north, and most people were living in crowded tenements with poor sanitation next to factories. They were breathing bad air, and these problems were addressed at the time by architects, engineers, and social workers. And this is the time around where planning emerged as a discipline that was borrowed from other professionals, like I said. It looked at the city as a built and social environment, how people related to their landscape and to each other. And around this time, planning became a tool to manage urban growth and quote, the evils of the city life. There was an attempt to move living spaces away from these factories, and it was also seen as a form of social control by rich urban reformers worried about poverty and violence of morally questionable city dwellers. And this is what influenced suburban development. And honestly, sadly, we haven't learned much up to now. Next. And this gentleman in this picture, his name is William Gross. He helped create an African-American community in Central District. And it's documented that he moved here in Seattle in around 1861 and was Seattle's second Black resident. And in 1876, he opened a restaurant and a hotel on Yesler Way. And he named it Our House, which was a popular hotel with Seattle's largely at the time white populations. And later he added a barbershop. And I just want to add that restaurants and barbershops were the two of the only occupations open to Blacks in Seattle at the time. And even though Seattle did not have the explicitly racist laws of neighboring states like Oregon or Idaho, the opportunities offered to them were limited, usually menial positions. And most of the important positions at the time were jobs around lumbering, mining, or even shipping was close to Black Americans. The other thing I wanted to add is Gross's hotel provided lodging for many of Seattle's earliest Black residents who arrived here as transit laborers in the later part of the 19th century. And he also ended up buying land where that's how African Americans ended up making a home out of Central District. Next. And this is as most of you know, in May 1882, Congress, responding to pressure from unions, passed this Chinese Exclusion Act. And this treaty with the Chinese government banned Chinese immigrants from entering America and called for the deportation of anyone who arrived after 1880. Chinese immigrants began arriving in America in significant numbers in the 1850s, and most were coming from the southern provinces of China, where war, persecution, and famine caused deaths of millions. I also want to add that during this time, American businessmen actively sought Chinese laborers in mines and other industries, using them to provide much of the labor of building the transcontinental railroads. And at first, they were praised as diligent workers, and this praise turned into hostility as the railroad was completed and competition for other jobs increased. Also, we see anti-Chinese political activity and violence erupting at this time, and the Constitution of Washington at the time had some alien laws that impacted it. Next. Between the 1920s and 40s, we see an increased racialized planning policies like restrictive covenants, which prohibited African Americans and other people of color in integrating into white neighborhoods. We see here in our areas ranging from parts of Alki and Ballard all through the alphabet to View Ridge and Wedgwood. These neighborhoods were restricted to whites and Caucasians only, or it banned Jewish, Hebrews, Negroes or Ethiopians. That's exactly the words that the racially restrictive covenants used. And it banned them from owning property or even residing there. But again, it's important to really add that in wealthier enclaves, such as Windermere and Birdmore, domestic servants were conveniently exempted. They could stay there. Next. And in this slide is also we see how Executive Order 9066 impacted the Japanese Americans. This was between 1942 to 46. Here in our region, we see about 2,000 people removed from Seattle to Camp Harmony in Puyallup. And this also is important to talk about this history because it caused significant loss of property and community ties for these communities. And the fairgrounds was a division of about 43 acres, which was had like 4 sections. And I'm just going to talk about the other slide, finish this. And each family was allotted a mere about 50 square feet of space to live in, and thus many internees describe their living space as unfit for families. And up to today, the code right now states that you can have any living space smaller than 70 square feet, but up to today, the folks who were calling for the executive order and other things, not only in Seattle, but areas like Bellevue, are the folks that really benefited from taking land from these communities and developing and things like that. Next. So I think it's important to also talk about how zoning impacted our region, and zoning began here over 100 years ago. And at the beginning, it focused on establishing and enforcing segregation, though it was typically framed as necessary separation of incompatible land users. Like I talked about earlier, for example, factories cannot be next to homes, and which is how it is still presented today. And then in 1917, there was a Supreme Court decision which overturned a racial zoning ordinance in Louisville, Kentucky. In its place, zoning based on other factors like lot size arose to enforce racial segregation indirectly. And the landmark Euclid Supreme Court decision in 1918 upheld this form of zoning. And also Seattle, even though Seattle never had this explicit zoning, racial zoning, every time I talk about, racialized policies and things like that, I see that Seattle never had any explicit things or laws and things like that. But if you look at it, our zoning ordinance, which was adopted in 1923, was developed with the help from a gentleman called Harlan Bartholomew. I mispronounce his name every time. And he was a proponent of racial zoning. And then also in 1923, ordinances created single-family zoning in Seattle for the first time. And previously, we know that multi-unit structures had been allowed on all lots. But since 1923, the extent of single-family zoning in Seattle was increased multiple times. Next. And while Seattle's first zoning ordinance, again, was not explicitly based on race, like I said, summary documents from its development reveal the same underlying motivations. For example, this picture you see is an archival document which reveals the belief that expanding the type of uses and development will lead to quote unquote lower standard of racial strength and virility, unquote, and that implementing zoning laws were the appropriate way to essentially maintain segregation. Next. Here, which slide is next? Okay, here it's also important to talk about the rise of transportation system, which expanded the extensive rail system that were later removed when the automobile industry ruined the private market for passenger rail, and it became expensive for public entities to operate and maintain. And the rise of the automobile also added too much congestion for streetcars to function. And also during this time, suburban development starts to expand, fueled by white flight from city centers, which increased car ownership and subsidized infrastructure. Next. Let me know if I'm speaking too fast. So this is the Great Depression era map from the Homeowners Loan Corporation, which shows redlining in action. And as you all know, in the homeowners loan corporations recruited mortgage lenders, developers, and other real estate appraisers in nearly 250 cities, including Seattle, to create maps that color-coded credit worthiness and risk on neighborhoods. What does this mean? Neighborhoods were color-coded based on potential credit risks they pose to homeowners. Green and blue was coded as desirable neighborhoods, and these were the kind of places where white buyers will look to live. And yellow and red was, hazardous and declining neighborhoods, and these were neighborhoods that were noted because of the high densities of African Americans and other people of color demographics, and will therefore be considered discouraging at the time for folks to invest in. And again, this is what redlining in the most literal sense meant. Next.
Carla? There we go.
Yeah, so this investment in cities and growth of the suburban area is what we see here between 1940s and 1960s. And I talked earlier about the great migration of African Americans and others to the northern cities. And here I like mentioning this because this is where we also see racialized federal policies facilitating white families moving out of the city and into the suburbs. And also, it's really important to talk about how the US transportation policy created huge networks of freeways that helped suburban expand. And this Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956 paid for much of this new interstate highway system throughout the country at the time. I also want to mention that the federal government created new subsidies for home ownership, such as Federal Housing Administration and the GI Bill. And between 1934 and 1962, it's documented that the federal government backed over $120 billion of home loans, and more than 98% of that went to the white home buyers. And most of the subsidies also went to new homes in the suburb to top that off. Next. And this period we see between 40s and 60s, the urban renewal, furthering class and race stratification. Neighborhoods of color declared blighted at that time. There's also this time of slum clearance, And then also during this time, it was called separate but equal, but we know that was not the reality. We see that low-income neighborhoods of color were being demolished for highway expansion. Families were being displaced and relocated to areas with purely built public housing projects, lack of municipal services and community resources. low performing schools, we see employment discrimination, and to top that off, undervalued land and limited access to bank loan for these families. Next. Also, this is the time of disinvestment in cities and the growth of the suburbs. The racialized policies facilitated white families moving out of the cities. And at this time, we see the US advancing racial segregation, and suburbs were looked at as private prejudice and public policy, while areas that were inner cities and had a lot of government disinvestments were called quote unquote ghettos. And the net result of this was that people of color were still segregated to the urban core of the region where jobs, public services, and opportunities were declining. Next. Here is the Fair Housing Act of 1968, which outlawed redlining and other race-based housing discrimination. That was my computer saying that it's going to die. Give me a second. Sorry. Yes. So this is the the Fair Housing Act of 1968, again, which outlawed redlining and other housing discrimination. And we know that the impacts have stayed. Right now, with my current job with the city of Seattle around the equitable development, we use new maps that were produced in 2016. And it shows the areas that have high risk displacement and low access to opportunity. And when you overlay those maps with the redlining map, you see that in the same neighborhoods that were redlined or suffered from widespread disadvancement are the same ones that show up in the 1930s impoverished minority or people of color dominated neighborhoods. And we know that although legal discrimination has been outlawed, housing and banking is still far from equal. In the Fair Housing Act, the protected classes in Washington includes race, color, and national origin, creed, sex, disability, familial status, marital status, sexual orientation, including gender identity, and also veteran and military in Washington. And the city of Seattle particularly has more protected classes that includes the age, the political ideology, the use of trained guide dogs, and also Section 8, the housing choice vouchers status. Next. Growth Management Act was adopted in response to the sprawl. And around this time too, we see the tech boom and then bust of the early 2000s. We see the housing bubble and the Great Recession. This also was a time for subprime mortgage crisis and also an uneven recovery, which right now, as we are also, folks are talking about recovering from COVID to make sure that we are ensuring that it's equitable. This is also the time that the Recovery Act was introduced, and there was a lot of wealth disparities greater than ever, where a lot of people of color, especially Black communities, lost their wealth. And also this is the time that discriminatory lending practices affects all communities of color, and that continues up to today. Next. This is a book, The Color of Law, that I will suggest you make it one of your summer reading. Even I had it for a long time. COVID helped me read and finish it. And Richard says in his book that today's residential segregation is not the unintended consequence of individual choices and of otherwise well-meaning law or regulation, but of unhidden public policy that explicitly segregated every metropolitan area in the United States. Next. That concludes the history part. I have some discussion questions. So I have a question for you because the next thing is around the current impacts. It's 7:30. Would you prefer that I go through the current impacts and then come back to the discussion questions, because that also has discussion questions? Or should we, or okay, I'll answer my own question. So so that I can rest a little bit, let's have a few people in the next 3 to 5 minutes just really looking at these questions. I ask how much of this history was familiar, how much was new to you, what has been your personal experience of segregation, and what are some examples of how this history continues to this day in your agency. So if I can have 1 or 2, where you work currently, or even the 34 district Democrats. So how do you see that directly or indirectly in impacting, or some example that you're seeing, so that I can get before we go to the next thing. Can I get some volunteers? You can answer those questions.
Dave, I wanted to welcome Dave. Dave is, you're from Tacoma, right? From Pierce County, is that right?
I am, yes. I'm from Pierce County in Tacoma, yep.
Yeah, I would love if you had, Dave works in real estate. And so that I invited him because I thought this could really be a great sort of perspective to add to our discussion. And so Dave, I would love to share the floor with you to give us perspective or anything you'd like to say.
Oh, well, I mean, I'm here to listen and learn just like everybody else. Can never stop learning. I'm a former educator of 15 years. So that was I'm fairly new to the real estate space. Not new, I guess 4 years. I've been in for a little bit, but I came in as an owner. And so that it's a different perspective for me. So my wife and I own Windermere Abode. So we're in the Windermere family in terms of who we work with. But we came in with an equity lens because I couldn't do the job any other way, because I'm a 15-year educator. My last job was an assistant principal at Foss High School down here in Tacoma. I used to be at Kent, and my first administrative job was at Kent in, Mill Creek, down on Central Ave right there. So very diverse school, loved it. But yeah, going into real estate, a lot of this was new to me in terms of, I started learning in 2016 about like redlining, and I was still in education at the time. And so when we came into ownership at Windermere, we just knew that we wanted to do something that was a little bit different, talk about some of these things, because I couldn't be in the space if we weren't coming from an equity lens. So how much of this was familiar? Most of it was familiar. The local stuff is what I'm mostly interested in. I thought that, like I was talking about the equity lost, I was talking about when the FHA and the VA loans and stuff like that came out, and 2% of those, or 98% went to whites. I mean, when you think about the equity in 10 years, say in Seattle or any of the areas, it's and you spread that across 98% of a population, or that's a lot. That's a lot of money, and that's just 10 years. That's not 50 or 100 or 200 or 400. Like when you start adding that up and multiplying it, it's just like, well, I'm surprised the wealth gap isn't bigger, but my fear is it will be bigger. I believe we're on track to double and quadruple it, actually, the way that we're currently going, at the pace we're currently at. So my personal experience of segregation has been, my life. I mean, I grew up so I'm part Japanese as well. So my mom is Black and Japanese. My grandmother on my mom's side is Japanese. And then my other side of the family is from Beaumont, Texas. So we still have land that's been passed down through generations from my enslaved family on my Jones side, my McDowell, Breed, Smith, Walker. We just had a family reunion, so I met all my people down there. And yeah, we have land down there. We have acreage that we've actually, so even though I know most people didn't get land, when they were freed, we still were not getting royalties on the oil that has been drilled down there for years and years and years and years, until, I don't know, not very long, about 20 years ago. So we say we need land, but it's just like, well, you're still screwing us on all the oil that you drilled, and not paying us. And so my people are finally getting money back on that, but it's not, by now it's tapped, and now they're talking about timber. And I want to be a part of that discussion. So that's why I'm getting back tapped in. So that's my personal experience with segregation. I think we all are experiencing it right now. We're still redlining communities, home values are still tied to whether Black and brown people or where they're at. That's not stopped, that's continued. And yeah, I mean, what are some examples? I mean, it's just look around. I mean, January, it's everywhere. It's pervasive. And I see, it's like being in the, you know, like how you see something and you can't unsee it. When we talk about white supremacy, I can't unsee it now. Like it's literally in every walk and facet of my life. And so that for me is hard to navigate and exhausting, to be honest, because I can see it. But you just gotta keep showing up, keep fighting, and thank you for taking your time today. And I'm learning just along with everybody else still.
Thank you for that. Is there anyone else that want to share? Just one more person before we move on, because I also, like, as you were talking, remember that earlier today we were doing a presentation on data and the census and who it's impacting, how we undo all that. And as you were talking, remember that one of the data that we had shared earlier today that my colleague shared was how, you know, even though the African Americans were redlined in Central District, in 1990, the population there was more than 60% Black, right? And then in 2010, it was less than a quarter, 25%. And then now that we have done the 2020 census, it's going to be really less. And that's showing up right now in, you know, that name, as people actually are coming back from the suburbs and you know, to the urban core where there's access to jobs and transportation and things like that. Who's losing out again? It's those communities that did not have a choice at the time, and they built the cultural centers and everything that they needed to thrive. And now they don't have access to the same opportunities because, you know, not only that, the folks who were able to buy the homes during that time, now, you know, they probably end up selling it because they cannot afford the taxes and all that. And and it also impacts, you know, the politics of all of it, right? As people are gentrified and displaced, especially to South King County, all the way to Pierce County, you see that also they lose their political base. So I just also, I wanted to add that.
Well, my family has a condo in the Central District, and we are not selling. We will never sell, and so we're going to hold on to that for a long time.
If we don't have any other volunteer, I will just move on to the current impacts. So next slide, please. Next. So due to this history that I talked about, we see that in this current moment also, including COVID impacts and other economic impacts, we are experiencing, you know, the possibility of disaster gentrification. That was also happening in Seattle as soon as COVID hit, where real estate companies in the east side, for example, were trying to buy land from elders in Central District. We saw that during COVID. We see the impacts of climate refugeeism and the talk of reparations, and also the limits of economic growth on this finite planet. We are seeing, you've seen how climate is impacting our region right now, or even the whole of the United States, where, you know, we have 100 and more degree is in here in this area where, like, there's droughts and things like that in the East Coast currently. And I started with that framework about reparations because, you know, I think a lot of different groups that were impacted by policies and things like that ended up getting some type of reparations and things like that. But I think the enslaved Africans, African American and Blacks are the only ones that have never gotten that. And then when we start talking about reparation, people think about socialism and all that. But wasn't having $210 billion go to majority white communities a form of reparations, and the equity that, and right now, the loss of equity that we were talking about? That's just something that you need to just think about and things like that. It's just a question. Next. So the ongoing impacts that I'm going to talk about is still segregated cities, populations that are living in high poverty neighborhoods, who they are, disparities in household wealth, income by race, disparities in employment, the impacts of exclusionary zoning, how suburbanization of poverty is impacting us, and some of the impacts of redlining, as well as the COVID housing security impacts. Next. So this is the redlining map on my left that I shared earlier on the history. And on the right, you see the 2010 census block data, where one dot represents one person. So blue represents white, green it represents Black, and then red, Asian, and orange Hispanic, and then the purple that you hardly see is other race. So looking at this, you see the north of the Ship Canal and a sea of blue, meaning that majority of communities living in North Seattle are mostly white communities, and then the opposite on the south of the Ship Canal. There's some of this other like red and orange in North Seattle. You also see that as people are being displaced from Seattle and are going to South King County all the way to Pierce County, there is neighborhoods in North Seattle like Lake City, Northgate and things like that, that some people, because of the affordable housing that's there, that are also being displaced too. Next. Here we talk about the population living in high poverty neighborhoods. Again, you see that the Asian and Pacific Islanders, again, 17% of those communities. And this is Seattle. So I just want to put it in perspective, the reason that it's 14% Black, most of the people who are already been displaced in Black folks. But you see the Native Americans and Asians and Black are the populations living in high poverty neighborhoods in Seattle, and this was captured in 2017. Next. We also see that homelessness disproportionately impacts people of color. Again, this is from 2017, and when they used to do the annual homelessness count, and we see that African Americans disproportionately impacted by homelessness, and 5 times more, Native Americans 7 times more, in Pacific Islanders 3 times more than the white counterparts. Next. This also speaks to how neighborhood elementary schools impacted. Again, we see that high-performing schools are mostly schools that white students attend. It looks at 2 or more races, and the lowest performing groups in the schools are in Black, 3.7, other low income folks, and then in English language learners and special education. Next. We also see disparities in household wealth, as Dave mentioned earlier. Again, white folks and make the most and just look at the difference of where, the household wealth of a white person is closer to 132,000 or more than 132,000 compared to less than 10,000 for Black and families. So this disparities in household wealth continues to happen, and as Dave was saying earlier, it's gonna be. Go ahead, Dave.
Does that 132,000? Oh, I'm sorry. Was that someone else raising their hand?
I just had a question, but go ahead, Dave.
I was just asking if that 132,000, does that include home equity or no?
No.
That's just income.
Yeah, income.
That's crazy.
Yeah. Uba, I have a question. Is this graph here that we're looking at, is that for Seattle or is that for Washington, or what is this for? I just need a context for this.
Oh, so it's not for Seattle. It's Washington State.
Okay.
And it's similar throughout the nation too. There's another one that I came across a while back when we were doing at the city of Seattle and the recovery and planning and things like that, that I'm gonna look up that one, and it actually answers the question Dave asked about, does it include equity and things like that? And I could send that to you guys. I don't remember exactly what it said. It was a while back. So I don't know what.
I would be interested to see that.
I would too. Thank you.
Yeah, and the reason why is because, like, in Washington, especially, we're in the top 5 in terms of appreciation for the last who knows how long. I mean, we all know our prices have been going up like crazy. But
yes.
With that, when you have the home ownership rates, actually, from 2008 to 2018, our Black home ownership rate actually decreased. So when you factor in that, along with the being top 5 in appreciation, so who's gaining that wealth, and then we already have this big of a gap. That's why I say by the time another 100 years in the next century, it's gonna be quadrupled or doubled at least from where it's at right now.
Yes, and the household wealth, as far as also wealth building and all that is concerned, I have some data that was just finalized, particularly for Seattle, by race, that I can also send your way. Any other questions on this?
I just wanted to add in that on our website, which I will put into the chat, we have it's called the Programs Hub page, and you can go directly to that and you can see all the information from the programs that we've been doing over this year since January. And so I will put all this into our Hub page so that anybody can look at it. And so Dave, if you know people and you wanted to direct anybody to see this presentation, I'll give you that link.
Thank you. Next slide. And this one is income by race from 2018. Again, 6 figures for white communities and less than $50,000. When you look at households that have the highest median income, this is particularly for city of Seattle. And then again, more than double that of Black households. Next. We also see disparities in unemployment rates. Again, Black men have the highest unemployment rates. This was actually from 2019 to December 2020. Yeah, and if you compare again white men and Black men, and it's almost double for Black men. Next. And this also compares, just to go back, it also compares December 2019 to December 2020. As you can see, the dark blue is December 2019, and December 2020. And I think this also speaks to the unemployment rate increasing because of COVID last year. Next. I've already, talked about this earlier, and it's going to continue when we do the census. This data is not helping the outcomes that we're producing my program in Seattle, but I argue that it's just 5 years old, and we really we just invested less than $50 million in the last 5 years, about to invest another, but we're able to leverage over 200 of housing staff, but still it's just a drop in the bucket. Next. I talked about the impacts of exclusionary zoning. No, I talked about the history of exclusionary zoning. And we know that traditionally exclusionary zoning policies have kept poor central city residents out of the suburbs with this kind of minimum lot size requirements, and also this single residence per lot requirements. Together, these requirements make it difficult to build multifamily units. Also, we know, particularly in the city of Seattle and other, neighborhoods, that most of Seattle is zoned for single family, over 66%, and there's not a lot of people that are living in the single family homes too. It's normally total of 4, and then we see empty nesters staying in this huge single family homes, and that makes it really hard, for, we ran out of land in Seattle, right? So I just wanted to mention this piece. And right now we're, the city of Seattle, pulling together our data around this as we are embarking on Seattle's 2043 and the 2043 comprehensive plan update. Next. I had mentioned how the suburbanization of poverty, which is also a zoning impact. And this is a data from the Brooklyn Institute in New York, where the number of suburban people living in poverty, and you can see it's all over Washington, increased in 90 out of the 97 metropolitan areas from 2000 to 2015. And according to this, majority of low-income people, the ones who are being impacted by this, the researchers profiled about 100 metropolitan areas, including Seattle. And as you can see here, with no exception to this trend in our region. And over the past decade also, the number of suburban poor increased by almost 80%. We all know that South King County is particularly emblematic of what is happening in the nation at large. We know that South King County encapsulates so many of the different forces that are contributing to the suburban poverty here. And we also need to kind of think about the other consideration and forces that are impacting this, including, immigration, rising population, job and wage changes, and influxes of low-income families from, again, the urban core who are seeking affordable housing, and all of this catalyzed by the economic downturn. So I lived in Bellevue for the last 10 years, and I was renting. And when I got ready to buy a house, I was not able to, with my income too, which, and working for the city of Seattle, I wasn't able to afford a house either in Seattle or Bellevue, and ended up, I ended up in Renton. So that just kind of tells you, all this suburbanation of poverty impacts that's happening in our region. Next. This next slide right now here shows the outcomes for people living in areas that were previously redlined. They're still experiencing impacts in terms of segregation. The neighborhoods that were redlined have higher proportion of people of color compared to the rest of Seattle. We know that the poverty rates are higher in areas that had, lower grades of desirability. The ones that were either the red and the yellow were either declining or, hazardous. We also know most of the neighborhoods that were had a lower grades of desirability have higher number of contaminated sites. Speaking again to what we were talking about earlier, and compounded by these other racial inequities, people's life experience expectations are shorter in areas that were graded either hazardous or declining, and this subsequently saw less investments in there's so less investments. A lot of times folks will look at this numbers and say that the health, there's not a huge difference as far as age is concerned. But if you look at the life expectancies in areas like South Park, for example, it's 13 years less than in wealthy neighborhoods like Magnolia and things like that. There's also another data that compares the East Side, Mercer Island, to one of the cities in South King County, and that also has a difference of more than a decade. And your zip code should not be determining how long you get to live or your health. Next. This is a quick supplemental information snapshot of the COVID impacts. With this example, it's referring to data from the Census Bureau's household pulse survey on how disproportionately large share of people of color have missed their mortgage and rent payment. As you can see, 18% and missed their mortgage, people of color, and 34% and missed their rent payments. And this was June 2020. So if you look at the data right now, it will definitely be more than that. And this half of the adults in Seattle metro area in a household where someone is experiencing a loss of employment income. Data is some of the data that our demographer shared, and we know that many have delayed making rent and housing payments. It's probably, I think, around 18 or 20% of mortgage holders of color compared to 6% of white counterparts, and 34% of renters of color compared to 9% of their white renters either missed their June payment 2020 or had it deferred. And both the county and the city of Seattle and all the other cities are talking about and what do we need to do to recover, and who do we need to help currently? And there's this kind of like false dichotomy of, do we, help small landlords to catch up on their, on their payments? Do we make sure that in the interim, in the short term, that all renters who are behind, we avoid them having been evicted, and we help them and things like that? And like right now, as somebody who's running for office, and that kind of those questions really, and I reflected in a different way, right? So depending on who's talking to you, but before I'll be like, okay, as a civil servant, I'm like, okay, we really just need to help the renters right now. So I just wanted to share this housing insecurity COVID impacts that continue to impact all our constituents. I just came with a whole, just an hour of presentation. This is the last slide, and then the next one is that we have an opportunity for discussion questions. But this is a very quiet group, so what do we do, Rachel?
Well, I had a question, and hopefully maybe we can just continue discussing and talking about it. Speaking about this question of the role of government and planning and policy, of course, this information is devastating to take in. And what I wanted to just say from my experience is that I am hearing from folks, from white folks, who are interested, and I just am sorry and sad, because I thought this would be one of the ways that people could learn about what's going on and how to be allies and how to, find out what white people can do as allies to continue this work forward. So my question is, as a white person, what thoughts or perspective do you have about how best to approach this situation, as far as starting in the stages of dismantling things like redlining, these systemic systems that are so ingrained? Is going at it politically, is that a good strategy to boot out the people who are status quoing and bring in people who have new, big, bold ideas? Or is activism an effective strategy? So I'm thinking about strategies, because my work continues and I want to do the work. So I'm sort of asking for myself, but I'm also asking for folks that I am trying to share this information with, and I am trying to get people to learn about these things and really understand and acknowledge that this is happening in our country. So any perspective about strategies of how to attack these systems?
I'm going to respond to that question by, again, shamelessly plugging the Equitable Development Initiative as one of the programs that is actually working on impacting all these systems, right, that we're talking about. And the Equitable Development Initiative was created to, achieve racial and social equity, with the understanding that we need strong communities and strong people. And this means community stability and resilience in the face of displacement pressure. And we approach that from, as Seattle is growing, we need to achieve goals that require more public investments above the current levels. And we have equity drivers that the framework for the EDI, the equitable development. And these are like 6 equity drivers that starts from, promoting economic opportunity for marginalized communities. When we talk about equity, not the real estate type of equity or money equity, but racial equity, we have to talk about how marginalized populations are getting access to economic opportunity, how we are providing access to quality education, how we are training these communities and making sure that they have living wage jobs. The second equity driver is around displacement. So how do we enact policies and programs that allow these communities again and populations to thrive and stay in their communities, and not only looking at residential displacement, but also looking at how business and commercial displacement is impacting these communities, how, you know, cultural displacement is impacting, as we, like, for example, I talked about in the Central District, like let me take an example right now of Chinatown ID, where commercial affordability is an issue right now. We have a state constitution that it impacts, you know, how we the gifting of public funds as a government impacts us, right? So how do you make sure that we are investing in these communities and these small businesses, you know, and things like that. I think also, like, I think the local community character, this is around the building on the local culture assets of these communities. We know that, for example, Central District is, you know, land rich. They have a lot of churches there that right now all the folks that used to go there have been displaced. So how we make sure that those cultural assets stay in that community and it's utilized for the things that are needed in that community, for example. The fourth one is around transportation and prioritizing investments in an effective and affordable transportation that supports particularly transit-dependent communities. And what I mean by this is, you know, we make sure that we see that folks are being displaced, and they're being displaced to areas that don't have transportation that can take them not only to their jobs, but also can take them to in extracurricular activities with their children. You know, like the same kind of bus system or light rail system schedule for the weekdays from 9 to 5. How do we make sure that works on the weekends for the families and communities that need it? And then the fifth in equity driver is around it's around safe neighborhoods, and we know that there's a lot of food deserts in a lot of neighborhoods in Seattle and other areas. So how do we make sure that, you know, we have open space park and all those opportunities for these neighborhoods? And finally, it's really, really important to make sure that all the neighborhoods are accessible to everyone. And when we talk about that, we don't just talk about you know, the residential piece, but think about all the things that a family needs in order for them to thrive in a place like North Seattle. So I think this, and I'm mentioning this because these goals have been co-created with community as a way to invest and build integrated cross-sector and community-driven approaches that benefit these low-income people of color across Seattle. And these equity drivers have not been designed to deploy individually. So you don't just talk about economic development or displacement alone, or, you know, but in order to see this transformational change that we need, we have to make sure that we are, you know, deploying this concurrently. So I'm not sure if that answered your question, but I took this opportunity to talk about the EDI, but there can be a lot of other different strategies out there. You know, the other pieces, you know, there's this kind of movement around what a participatory budgeting looks like and who co-designs that with and making sure that the city or the government is not driving that process. I also want to make sure that we understand that data, both qualitative and quantitative data, plays a huge role in being used as an accountability piece for us to make sure that we are identifying solutions with an eye to root causes, so that both the inside folks and the outside folks are disrupting and shifting these racially disproportionate outcomes. And finally, I think making sure that communities are reflected in these positions of power. Like it's not like 7 or 9 white men making decisions for the whole community. I think also that's important. So those are some of the things that I'm thinking about.
Great.
What's crazy is you can say all that and then I have more to add to it.
Yay.
So, I mean, I take a more holistic approach, I guess, because when I look at it, I read a book called, or I'm reading it again, actually, Race for Profit. I don't know if anyone's familiar. It's a really good book, but it's basically about why fair housing hasn't worked. And the author, Kianja Yamada Taylor, I don't know if I pronounced her name right, but in there's this excerpt that talks about between 1940 in 1950, the growth of Black homeownership even outpaced that of white homeowners. It was, so in 1951, 1 in every 3 urban Black families owned their home. And in 1940 through 1950, white homeownership in the cities rose 84%, but for Blacks, it rose 137%. That was reported by Fortune magazine in 1956. But just when I see like how it used to be, and then all of these specific intentional acts, like whether in that you've just mapped, that you've just talked to us about in the last hour, I just feel like, okay, if we did that 50 years ago and we had a Fair Housing Act and that was policy, then we got to address who, like you said, we can't have everyone in the room that looks the same and has the same perspective. We also have to start talking about implicit biases because we all have them, and we have to start talking about reconciliation as a country. We have to say like, okay, if this is how you felt or this is how you think right now, you're not welcome here. If you're a white supremacist, you are not welcome here. And by white supremacy, I mean like an ideology, like that you feel like white people are superior to other ethnicities and races. That can be overt or covert. I mean, that could be overt or covert, and that could be subconscious. And since we have implicit biases, it could be a subconscious bias of how the value system that you've been taught since you're in school. I hold some of them myself, and I have to reflect on that, and I have to fight and battle those. So if we've been taught a certain way, then I just don't see it changing until, as a country, we reconcile. The police won't change until they reconcile, like publicly, like the National Association of Realtors basically publicly acknowledged, like we acknowledge we've had a systemic, a history of systemic racism, and we have kept Black people out of homes, Black and brown people out of homes. They publicly said that. That's a huge step for the National Association of Realtors to come out and say that. I have not heard that necessarily from, I don't know, I might be missing something though. I don't know if you can share a link with me where the police office, where the police from a national perspective said, our data says this and we have been wrong. Like since we've been systemically harming Black and brown communities at 3 to 4 the times the rate. I haven't heard that yet. I just hear pushback. I hear fighting. I hear all of that. Even in the education field, I was in the education field. I haven't heard that from the Department of Education. I haven't heard that from, you know what I mean? Like, so how can we even, we're doing all this groundwork and we're putting all these policies in place and things, but if the people aren't acknowledging and reconciling, and then, like changing a mindset, changing a value system, I'm also another push that financial literacy should be a graduation requirement. Why are we holding that information back from every single child that goes to public education? At this point, it's negligence. We just saw the wealth gap. Mm-hmm. So when I look at all of these things on top of all of this stuff that you're just talking about, like it's so that's what I mean. I get so it's almost like space. I like my head starts to explode because it's so pervasive. It's so ingrained in what we are and how we become a country up to this point, that one way to reverse it is obviously through action and policy, like you've talked about. And then with the implicit biases, we're not even like addressing those. Like we can address, like if you're in an abusive relationship, yeah, you can change the sheets more often and you can do the dishes more often and you can even mow the lawn every week and the house is going to look better and all of those things. But until you actually address the person who's actually like beating on the other person, and that person reflects and says, hey, I acknowledge I'm wrong. That's the only way you can start. So like, I don't feel like as a country we've done that. We're in an abusive relationship, and the country is the abuser, and people like myself and other people of color are the victims. And the country has yet to basically come out and say, this is not okay in this house anymore. We will not accept you in this house if you act this way, or you think this way, vehemently. And then saying that publicly and policy wise. Like, yeah, you can say it with some empty words as a politician or whatever, but like, I want actual, like, real solid reconciliation, not all this pushback and then appeasing, and just money gets involved and it just gets all muddy. And it's just, I don't know, I lose hope. I'm gonna be honest, I lose hope after reading Race for Profit, because I'm saying she's mapping out all the things and the policies that have been put in place. And if those carrying out the policy have this implicit bias that they have not addressed, then we're going to continue to have the same issues. And it's almost we're going to run out of time, because the way the housing appreciation is going, from where I see it, home prices are only appreciating, and the trend line from 1960s is only going up. Tell me when you're going to buy a gallon of milk for $1.25 again. People laugh at me when they say that. Everyone laughs. And I go like, okay, well, yeah, the housing prices aren't going to keep going at the rate they are, but they're not going to like fall down to $100,000 ever again. We're not going to see it. So like the trend line is only going up. Yeah, there's dips in the trend line, but like, so how are we going to disrupt this? And we have all these ways and these ideas to do it, but we get a lot of pushback, and everything has to be moderate. And I'm like, I don't know if moderate, because it wasn't moderate how we got here. So I strongly argue with the moderate piece. It's like, how we got here was not moderate. It was by violence, it was by oppression, it was by stealing, it was by all of the things. And so anyway, I'm sorry, I'm rambling, but
no, I just want to add quickly, you're not rambling, actually. You're just getting to, and what exactly really, needs to happen, right? Within the city, we have this race and social justice toolkit that we're supposed to use to make our decisions on program policies and investments. And it answers three questions, like who benefits, who's burdened by it, and how do we mitigate it, and as you were talking, I just, remember that toolkit on paper looks really great, but how we operationalize, comes back differently. But also another thing I really want to add to what you're saying is we need to honestly foster authentic, trusting relationships, so that, when data goes either in scary direction or any other way, we work together to seek those solutions rather than blame each other, And this change, like you said, needs to be really systematic, and we, as you said, need to consider how these current policies and ways of doing work maintain and reinforce the structural institutional racism. And I'm like, as I'm talking about this, I am talking about government, right? Because that's where I work. But it's the same in any other institution, whether it's the real estate institution or education, as you said, or anything else, right? So I was like nodding my head as you were talking, because I was digging what you're saying.
Well, if does anybody, I'm just checking the clock. We've got about 5 more minutes. If anybody has any final questions,
Stephen has his hand up.
Steve, that's great. Go ahead, Steve.
Well, yeah, our nation is kind of going in a lot of areas. It's kind of going in the wrong direction, because there's all this, talk about the critical race, race theory, and this is basically what we're talking about. We're talking about by laws that were designed with racism in mind, and then you have places in the South where they're trying to not even talk about this kind of thing. You know, that's real. It's going to be really difficult, you know, for to address some of the underlying problems if we can't even, you know, talk about these historical you know, things that have been done in the name of, you know, protecting, you know, the rich and the powerful. You know, and then, you know, for example, you were talking about, you know, people, it's the you know, the laws are set up, you know, for you know, equality, but if the people that are not implementing those policies are not doing a good job, then they're ineffective. Like, there's an example of a woman who she wanted to sell her house, and she had you know, like she had two you know, value, you know, market evaluations to see how much it was worth, and they came back and she thought that they were way too low. So she had a relative, a white, you know, in-law, you know, come in, and she, you know, to be there when the third you know, evaluator came in, and she removed anything that would from her house, or any pictures or anything like that that would indicate that the house belonged to a Black person. And then she got a substantially higher evaluation from that. You know, that's just like taking the money away from, you know, from a person's wealth. You know, that because the house is usually the foundation of a family's you know, net worth. So anyway, yeah, that's all. I just wanted to say that. So
Yeah. Well, it is. Oh, the other question I had, Ubah, was, could you put that link to, was it DEI? Was that the, no, not DEI. What was the organ?
The equitable development, the initiative that I'm keeping shamelessly plugging in and say it's working.
Yes. Can you put that in the chat, because I would like to have that as a resource that I can have for myself and also share with others.
Okay.
Do you need to get that? I don't know if you know it.
No, I mean, it's the work I'm doing. It's just our website for Office of Planning and Community Development.
Yeah, I just, but if you could pop it into the chat, if you're, oh,
yeah,
excellent. Thank you. Thank you.
And then under that link, you can also find the monitoring data that I mentioned earlier.
Great. That is great. I'm gonna hold on to that for future reference. We are about at 8:30, which is our time for this program. I want to thank Ubah. I appreciate you coming and sharing all of this just treasure trove of information. And again, it's very overwhelming, and it's devastating to learn about. But it's really important, I think. I continue to just feel that the more folks who can learn about this, and who can, like Dave said, start to acknowledge that it is this country's history, and it is something that, although it's not easy to hear, it's really important that we continue to just start to make it a normal part of dialogue, a normal part of what we know about this country. And I know it's not going to be a short fight. I am just surrendering to the fact that I will be doing this work till the day I drop. And so, but I also have a daughter, and I know some of you have kids, and I am planning to continue to plant seeds to young people, because I think that also is necessary to continue keeping that mindset moving in a forward way. So Uba, thank you again so much. And thank you everybody for being here. Thank you, Dave, from beaming in from Pierce County. I mean, we've got potential, you know, north and south of this area. So thank you. And anyway, keep on keeping on. And thanks again, everybody. And we'll see you soon, and we'll let you know about future programs. You can always come to our website. I think I put the link up for the program hub page. Please check it out and come see us for future programs. And thanks again, everybody. Have a good evening.
Thank you. Bye.